perfect pan-fried steak, a skill that I believe everyone should know how to do. So beef on its own can be a bit flavorless, so you need a really lovely sauce, whether it's garlic butter or something a little bit more elaborate. So today I'm going to teach you how to make a creamy whole grain mustard sauce to go with your delicious steak. So let's get that on the go first. A little bit of butter. This is to cook with your shallots. Shallots are a lovely onion that are sweet and delicate to start off any sauce. So just 2 finely chopped shallots here. This sauce will be enough for 4 steaks, so generous quantities here. So you're just going to cook this down until the onions are lovely and soft. And then we're going to add our white wine to it, reduce that by half, some whole grain mustard, and of course Glenisk Organic Crème fraiche. So that's going to add a nice sharp edge to it that will break through the richness of the beef and the sauce. So onions are nicely softened. We're going to add in a good glug of white wine. And just a tip on cooking with wine. If you're not willing to drink it, don't cook with it. And especially a wine that's been hanging around in your house open for weeks on end would have oxidized. It's going to be quite revolting tasting. And because we're reducing it, it means that you're going to concentrate those horrible flavors. So for something like this, a nice Chardonnay would work really well. Nothing too heavily wooded, but something with a nice rounded, creamy bit of body. So we can ignore this for a little while. Reducing just means to bubble it vigorously until the moisture evaporates and you're left with about half of the liquid. And then we're going to add our whole grain mustard and our Glenisk Crème fraiche to it. So onto the steak. Now this is the fun part. So I've got a really lovely thick ribeye steak there. It's entirely up to you which cut of steak you use. I personally like a ribeye. I think the flavor's good, I think the texture's good, and that lovely big socket of fat in the middle is going to melt and it's going to give a lovely flavor and moisture to the steak. If you like your steak rare or medium rare, it's easier to achieve that result with a nice thick steak. Okay. So there's controversy over, what oil to use. Do you cook your steak in butter? What are we actually going to cook it in? What pan are we going to cook it in? A heavy base pan like this is actually ideal to cook a steak in, or of course a barbecue if you're lucky enough to have good weather for a barbecue. I'm going to cook it on this hot plate. So just pretend that this is an enormous pan. It will work exactly the same way. So I never put oil in a pan for cooking a steak because it starts burning and smoking and all the rest of it. What I prefer to do to make sure the steak itself caramelizes but still cooks properly is brush a little bit of sunflower oil onto the steak itself. So not in the pan, onto the steak itself. Sunflower oil is a flavorless oil. Season it really well too. Lots and lots of black pepper and salt. Steak needs a lot of seasoning. So even if you're shy about using salt in other foods and dishes, don't be afraid when you're doing up your steak. So plenty of good sea salt going in there. Flip it over, do the other side. So again, we're using the sunflower oil because it's flavorless, so it's not going to change the taste of your steak, and it will also reach a really high temperature without burning. You can use a very light olive oil. That's sort of the second or third pressing of the olive fruit because that's less likely to burn too. Okay, great. All right. So our sauce is reducing nicely. We can cook our steak at the same time. So you need to seal the steak really well on both sides. That means it needs pan contact and it's going to caramelize. It's going to go lovely and brown. That's where the flavor comes from. Okay. Now, the doneness of a steak. When you have a raw piece of steak in front of you, give it a good prod, feel what their texture's like. It's really, really soft. And an analogy that chefs use is you can liken it to the fleshy bit at the bottom of your thumb. Okay, so if you come along and squeeze that for me, okay, that's what a raw bit of meat feels like. So once you've seared it, and it's a rare steak, it's going to feel the same texture as if you pinch these 2 fingers together. That's a rare steak. Pinch the next finger, that's medium rare. You can actually feel this bit getting firmer. So that's an analogy for what a steak feels like as it cooks. The 4th finger is a medium steak, and your little baby finger is what then a well-done steak feels like. It's really, really firm. So without further ado, and without further nattering, let's get the steak onto the... You hear that sizzle? You have to make sure that your pan is really hot before you put the steak on it, so you can get that good pan contact. If it's not hot enough, the steak's going to go grey. It's going to start boiling as such. So you definitely don't want that. So while that steak is sealing, it'll take about 3 minutes. I can't give you an exact time because it depends on your pan, and it depends on your cooker, but it's about 3 minutes to seal, and leave it alone. Don't be fiddling with it. But if you come and have a look in this pan, you'll see that the wine has reduced down a lot, so you're left with this lovely, thick, syrupy sauce. So we've concentrated down the lovely flavors of our Chardonnay. So into this, we're going to add our whole grain mustard. Now this, incidentally, is also be a fabulous sauce for a pork chop. So pork chop, and you can start it off on the hob and then finish it off in the oven just to make sure it's cooked through. So just mix this really well. Oh, that smells gorgeous. Mustard has this lovely tart, vinegary scent to it, plus a lovely sweetness. It's definitely one of my favorite store cupboard ingredients. I always have Dijon mustard and whole grain mustard in the cupboard. And a pot of Glenisk Crème fraiche. In we go. Now, don't go too wild with bubbling this up, because cream and crème fraiche don't like to be boiled incessantly. So on a medium heat, make sure that this is simmering well. So my steak is almost ready to be turned over. Now you'll find with this method, by just putting the oil directly onto the steak, that you're not going to get as much smoke in your kitchen, because you don't have butter and oil burning in your pan. But unfortunately, there will be a certain amount of smoke, as you can see, and there's also a certain amount of grease that we sprayed everywhere. And if you look at that, that is beautiful caramelization there. The fat has gone lovely and crispy. Now, if you've got a sirloin or strip loin steak and you've got a bit of fat down the side, you need to, at some point, lift it up onto the fat and cook it. You don't want a raw bit of fat going out. There's another good tip, especially if your steaks are very, very thick, especially with fillet steak, you need to take it out of the fridge about an hour before you cook it. And the reason being, if I order a rare steak or medium rare steak and it just gets sealed on the outside, the inside is going to be icy, icy cold if it's just come out of the fridge. So what you'll find with your sauce is after a few minutes of bubbling, it goes thicker. That's the nature of it. That's what you want, a lovely thick, thick sauce. It smells gorgeous, absolutely delicious. And see the seasoning is really worked into the steak. You can get the flavor of it. Okay, so my sauce is ready. That's lovely and thick and unctuous. Let's check on my steak, give it a bit of a prod. That's looking good. Yeah, that's beautifully sealed. That's a done deal. So I'm just going to lean over and get my plate. So my ideal accompaniment to a lovely ribeye steak is creamy mashed potatoes. Actually, I love putting crème fraîche and a bit of Dijon or whole grain mustard through the mash. Gorgeous. Steamed green beans, really simple, crunchy, great complement. Of course, the lovely steak. To rape that over. Magic. And then our creamy whole grain mustard sauce. Let's get a spoon. Some muck around. Oh, wow. I'm salivating already. So it's actually quite a versatile sauce. Steak, pork, even a bit of chicken. Make a puddle of it at the bottom. So your homework for this week is to practice how to make the perfect pan-fried steak and creamy mustard sauce.